Hi, this is Chris Howard, host of Plugged In with Chris Howard, and I'm taking the Lions over the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. BetOnline has free odds and lines available online or on your mobile device. Visit BetOnline today.
This episode is brought to you by AARP. 10 years from today, Lisa Schneider will trade in her office job to become the leader of a pack of dogs. As the owner of her own dog rescue, that is. A second act made possible by the reskilling courses Lisa's taking now with AARP to help make sure her income lives as long as she does. And she can finally run with the big dogs. And the small dogs, who just think they're big dogs. That's why the younger you are, the more you need AARP. Learn more at aarp.org/skills.
Welcome to the Media Roundtable Industry Edition, where we dive deep into events and topics around the business of audio through the lens of the brands and the buyers who support it. I'm your host, Dan Granger, CEO and founder of Oxford Road, and we're going to go a little bit further behind the scenes to talk about the business of audio and the secrets of the craft, which allow brands and creators to impact audiences and culture through the work they put out into the world. Now, we announced a very special pivot in our programming a few weeks back, where we're not just going to source stories related to the business of audio ourselves. We actually are going to partner with a real live journalist who is dedicated full time to advancing the news of our industry. And that is the one and only James Cridland, who, in addition to running all of Podnews, the daily publication where we all get our information, he has also acquired Podcast Business Journal. And those are some of the types of stories that we're going to be focused on here today. So in this new segment, he's going to join us, share a little bit of context around some of the stories that we're discussing, and maybe a little bit of commentary when we can get him to state some of his personal views on some of these items. So welcome back, James. We're really happy to have you here.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's really good to be here. So thanks for asking me back.
We have a star-studded cast to support you, James. And some of these folks have been on the show a number of times. We have, of course, James Ingrassia, who's our head of client services at Oxford Road. Welcome back, other James. It's now dawning on me that we may need to designate which James we're talking about. So, so you can just be other James for this show, but we're glad that you're here, James.
Well, thank you.
Can you be Jersey James?
Jersey James. Jersey James. Well, people might mix him up though because of James Cridland's thick New Jersey accent. I'll bet you get taken for an East Coaster all the time. And then we also have Stu Redwine, who's already begun giving commentary. He's our head of creative. Welcome, Stu. And Stu, also, by the way, isn't there another podcast that you're affiliated with now besides just the Media Roundtable?
Absolutely, there is the exciting Ad Infinitum podcast where we break down audio ads. Currently as part of the Media Roundtable feed for this first season, and then we're going to have it as its own standalone and independent podcast, Ad Infinitum.
And is that an important podcast to listen to?
Absolutely, no question. There's no other podcast like it.
So James,
you want to hear radio ads, you want to hear radio ads, you want to hear Sirius XM ads, streaming ads, podcast ads, hear them, hear a grade on them, and hear actual people that make these ads break them down. I challenge you to find another place where this can be done. It can't be done, so you got to come to Ad Infinitum.
So I would listen, but I haven't read that I should listen in the Podcast Business Journal. And so
here we go.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm still on the fence, but we'll see what comes out in this week's publication. So and then also we have the last star here before we actually get started in the program. Very special guest. We have the one and only Miranda Romano. Wait a minute. Are we still Miranda Romano?
I'm not.
So
Legally,
confused.
I'm not.
It showed up as Miranda Romano. Miranda has Cunado. So Miranda has been. Miranda was the first person to ever work at Oxford Road, and we worked together at iHeart before launching the company. And she was part of the small team with Gary Brown and me that ended up leaving the radio world to dive into the wonderful world of podcasts. And today, Miranda leads all of our media efforts, and she has never been on the Media Roundtable before. We've been doing this show for 3 years. She's worked at the company for an eternity. She's never been here before.
I want her to wait for the perfect opportunity. And this is it.
Like maybe I should learn her name first. Yeah.
Miranda, what an honor. Welcome to the table.
I know. Thank you. No, the honor is mine. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Also, we have a conference room because Miranda's our longest standing team member. If you're here long enough, you get a conference room named after you. So our biggest conference room is the Romano, and she's always been Miranda Romano to me, but she does have a lovely husband and family. Daniel, great name and great guy. But I probably need to make sure that your name is not Miranda Romano on our documents that are market facing.
Oh, it's not. I do. HR is aware. They've fixed the issue, but the conference room should remain Romano.
It will. Yeah, no, that'll never change.
Your Zoom name still says Romano.
I know. Well, professionally, I'm Romano, but now the secret's out. I'm actually Cuñado. So.
Ooh. And you say it so well.
No one's going to be able to remember that secret.
There we go. I know.
Okay. Yeah, you guys want to talk about the news? What do you think? Should we get into it?
Let's do it.
All right, James.
Well, shall we go for the first story? Why not?
Let's do it. Yeah, let's go.
Yeah. So apparently the top 10 podcasts in the US reach a third of all podcast listeners, according to Edison Research, which released a bunch of data last week. So if you want to reach the 35% of all weekly podcast listeners, you only apparently have to advertise on 10 shows. There's a thing.
Well, and it goes deeper than that, because if you go, okay, well, I want to reach more than that. I want to reach like half of them or 60% of them, 75% of them. How many, if I were to advertise in like the top 50, how many would I reach?
Well, if you were advertising in the, I can't tell you the top 50, but in the top 100, if you advertised in all 100 of those, then you would reach 60% of all weekly podcast listeners. And obviously, by the time you reach 500, you're reaching 3/4 of them. So it's just really interesting looking at just the concentration of massive shows at the top. It's very much a long tail thing, but certainly the top, just looking at the top 10, 35% of all US weekly podcast listeners. Now, what that doesn't necessarily mean is, on the other side, that 75% of people don't listen to them. That's clearly not what that's saying, but that is saying that those top shows are incredibly large, which is a really interesting stat, I think.
Well, and it's interesting for us because I think if I'm a brand, I read a report like this and I go, okay, so you got 10 shows that really matter, and then you got maybe another 50 to 100 that if you really want to round out the bulk of it, you can kind of get everywhere with those shows. So why would you even look at any shows as a sponsor that are below that top tier? Why would you go for the long tail for those that are 100 through 10,000, say, in audience measurement? Why would you even waste your time? Why wouldn't you just go to the big ones? And I'm going to throw this over to the Oxford Road folks. What do you think? If you're a brand, what do you do with this?
So
I think go ahead, Miranda.
I was just going to say, media selection, it's not black and white, right? So it really should ladder back into the client's goals, but also audience insights. And we do see that the best performing campaigns for our performance advertisers have a mix of small, medium, and large shows. The smaller shows bring in efficiency, and the larger shows definitely bring in scale. But I would say, particularly for like first and second time advertisers, we try to avoid putting probably more than 10% of budget on just one show. It's really important for us to focus on diversification and test across a wide array of different genres. Particularly with the small ones, it really gives us a low stakes way to test and learn the insights that we need in a smart and safe way. And then when it's time to test those larger shows that oftentimes cost more, the commitment's higher, we feel most confident in our investment selection.
Stu, what about you?
When I think about it, when I think about it, I just think of the history of podcasts, that it's like there's such a case to be made for coming in, owning the channel, and blocking out your competition. And so, yes, the reach being what it is, I can reach those people with the top 10. That's great. There's a huge long tail from 100 shows to 500 shows, but then to 1,000 shows, where I become, in my, whoever it is that I'm trying to reach, what I'm advertising, synonymous with this channel. And I just think of the early days with like ZipRecruiter or Blue Apron. There's such a opportunity to be present across the whole ecosystem. And for me, I had to make a choice to listen to more and more podcasts, but as I have, and as I listen more and more, I feel like it's people that have tattoos. It's like you have one tattoo, then you get a second tattoo, then you get more and more tattoos. Like podcast listeners listen to a lot of podcasts. And so if you can be everywhere, you can block out your competition. I think there's a tremendous case to be made for, I know these people are listening to a lot of podcasts. I want them to hear me everywhere that they go.
Well, so when you're talking about it from a buying point of view, it sounds like what you're saying is that if you have a longer list of opportunities that are lower cost, then you can get in a little bit, you can diversify a little more, you can lower the cost of entry as you start to build up your mix. And I hear Stu saying that, this idea of building a moat around your brand by taking all these assets off the table. I mean, one of the unique things about audio is that as long as exclusivities are still available for purchase, when you buy a particular show, your competitor cannot. At least that's the way that it's been historically. We know that we're all holding the line on that one the best we can. But I think there may be a counter argument there to say, well, look, if I can buy one host that represents 1,000 little ones, why bother with the 1,000 little ones? Why not just buy the big ones? So I'll throw it to you, James, and get your New Jersey point of view on this.
My view is that I liken this to TV buying, or maybe way back before like all the streamers are involved, but buying the top 10 podcasts would be the equivalent of just buying primetime TV shows. And if you're a paint company or a home decor company or Home Depot or Lowe's, you want to go buy HGTV or all those like fixer-upper channels, because people are in that mindset and thinking about that, and you're targeting them at the right time contextually. And I view that our podcast is that. And we've seen the results come in like that. We have a number of our clients, their top performing podcasts are not big shows. They are very specialty shows, whether it's an F1 racing show, whether it's a show that happens to be about the topic that client and services or needs. We find those successes there. Now, while it's hard to scale some of those, you then move over and find the lookalikes, and you get to put them into one big collective bucket. And the listeners to those shows are sometimes more engaged than the people who listen to the bigger shows that are just getting ears, but they're probably not the right ears, depending on what your goals are.
So I think for performance marketers, this will probably resonate, that it's better if you can be a little more targeted rather than just buy big, right? But there's something about reach that's always very attractive to brands. They really need scale. It's not helpful for them to, most of them can't even afford to look at a small podcast because the time it's going to take them to evaluate it, the squeeze won't be worth the juice. But I agree with you guys on the performance side. And, one of the things when you break it down to a planning process, like we talk a lot about the 70-20-10 approach, right? Where you've heard about Coca-Cola or Google or lots of great successful organizations have said, look, we believe in budgeting 70% of our money in a new initiative toward core proven assets. 20% should go against very reasonable tests, and 10% go against wild cards. We might call it the crazy shit bucket, like things that are not expected to pay back, but if it does, it could be a gusher, right? So things that are very speculative. if you were to adhere to that formula in your media planning, and all you do is start with large shows in your portfolio, you never really get the 20% to go towards other shows and expand the circle. You have to break that model and absorb an amount of risk that you may not be comfortable with, because you're going to have to expand your marketing pie in a channel by, 50% or something significant if you're going to get to the next level. So I think from a performance marketing point of view, if I'm trying to figure out, hey, look, do I go for the long tail or do I go for the top ones? I think what you guys are saying makes a lot of sense. Find some diversification at the beginning. But I would also argue that there is a place for the large reach shows. And just because they're big doesn't mean that they won't work. Sometimes they work better per dollar spent than the small ones. But to do that, you have to have a pretty robust, stable portfolio that's somewhat diversified so you can get up to that next level and really justify the budget for it. So interesting topic with a lot of ramifications for our folks that are listening who are tasked with planning this stuff. But let's keep moving. So James, sounds like there's some more information happening with Podchaser.
Yeah, so Podchaser has launched a product called Collections Plus, and it actually follows quite nicely from that last story in that what Collections Plus is there to do is to basically say, okay, if you want to advertise on this podcast, then here are some other podcasts that Podchaser would recommend you advertised on to make sure that you're hitting enough opportunities to listen and all of that. I think one of the things that we should probably have in this particular show is a drinking game around any mention of AI, because of course this uses AI models. Fantastic, that's what you need. But very much around sorting podcasts into verticals based on all of the available data points that you actually have, just to make it easier for advertisers to know, okay, if I want to advertise on 40 podcasts like this one, who should I be advertising with?
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right about the AI stuff. None of us would make it out of the episode. So if you like this, you would also like, yes. I think it's valuable. It is valuable. I think for us in looking at it, it's seeing where one show is like another and targeting against the audience. I mean, absolutely critical. It's also so important. I feel like the link back to the other story and Dan, something you had mentioned earlier, is that like we still want to make sure that we're testing and trying, like, how do we find the wild card stuff? Like, how do we not? There's something about this that smells like optimizing myself out of performance, or optimizing myself out of the channel, to go like, okay, how do I continue to experiment and just not lock myself into something that goes, if it's this, then it's this, then it's this, then it's that. How do we, go and try new things at the same time?
Yeah, and also on the other side, if a show is, I think that the clever stuff behind this is, if a show is a travel show, for example, at least this is the example that they give in the in their release. If a show is a travel show, well, that's one thing. But if that show keeps on talking about mental health, for example, then actually it's a good place for mental health consultant to be, advertising in as well. So it's doing some useful, topic work in terms of that as well. It's of course, we shouldn't forget that Podchaser itself is owned by Acast. And Acast have been doing a bunch of this sort of thing, but this is available to anybody who wants it.
So I was just going to say, I had the opportunity to chat with them earlier, and I haven't explored the new tool in depth. But what's really interesting is that, whereas before a lot of the categorization was being done manually, now again, because it's being done through AI, they're able to expand the scope of what they're looking at, right? So it's not just descriptions, but they're actually, looking at host background, guest credits, what conversations are focused around. And so by expanding the scope and granularity of what they're looking at, it actually gives us the opportunity. So you said like optimize out of. But actually gives us even more opportunity because we're able to take, let's say, podcasts that are working and try to find correlations between specific categories and podcasts that do work and use that as a way to explore and test into new opportunities.
I also think that using this tool is just like how you should use ChatGPT. You can use it for the base of a script or for the base of a notion or base of this, and you have to add some kind of human element to it. I mean, we've done optimizations for clients in the past where you've had two shows. They were both politically slanted, both by 3 female hosts, both talking about current events. One was a top performer, one was a bottom performer. So in this model, they would probably be paired up to each other. But then when you really go look into it, well, are they delivering the reads? Is it baked into the show? Is it a pre-roll versus a mid-roll? Was the content on that show engaging that day? So I think this is very smart and will take a lot of heavy lifting off of people's plates, but there also should be a careful, mindful eye to make sure that it's not just content and stats dictating the likelihood of these working.
Yeah, if you're a listener, I think that it clearly has value to have things suggested to you because it's such a wide world, right? And we know that Podchaser wants to be the IMDb of the space, and you know they're trying to solve a big problem that I think we all experience, which is like, where's the menu? Where is the list? We all have our issues with Apple and the way that they go about it, and how a massive show can be ranked right next to a brand new show that's just had a good week of traction around it. Like, it's hard to know how to list these things to even know what to consider. So, you know, anybody that can give us a TV guide version of the space, that's going to reduce some steps for all of us. But on the other hand, like you guys are saying, is if the goal of the user is not aligned to the algorithm, then it can take you into some funny places. So should it be used as a planning tool, knowing that one show may or may not reach performance goals if you're a performance marketer? Probably not. But is it interesting to say, have you considered? And because this one worked, maybe you should also look over here. I think as a supplementary tool to give us other things to look at, I'm sure there's value there. But it's going to be a while before we can really trust it based on the goals and the performance against those goals. And when you get into things like ad performance, that adds a layer of complexity that I think it's going to take some time to sort out.
Well, let's keep moving. Triton doing something interesting. They have the Triton Audio Marketplace, of course. Now they're letting advertisers book ads, not just on podcasts, but also in the same tool on streaming radio and on broadcast radio as well. They reckon it's an industry first. They've put all of the radio inventory from iHeartMedia's more than 850 stations, and they're shortly going to be adding radio stations from Katz Media, which I think the last time I looked was 3,400 of them. So it's a pretty big thing in terms of that. Do you see advertisers wanting to buy advertising across platform like that? So not just podcasts, but also particularly broadcast AM and FM radio as well?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So, James, why don't you tell us from your perspective when you're looking on behalf of the brands, what does this mean to you?
I think devil's in the details, really, when it comes down to it, is that this, we all know about remnant, we all know about programmatic buys that you can do on streaming. To apply that to radio, I think is really going to depend on the type of product that you have. So my guess is to get any tonnage, you're going to have to go nationwide, all radio stations, and probably not have too many levers you can pull to do that. Does say that it's guaranteed, which is interesting to hear, but I do think it all comes down to the customability of a message to a region or a format that you might be on. But then it also takes the whole element out of it. That's what makes podcast ads work so well, is that live endorsement piece. And so I very much doubt you can go buy live or voiced ads with this service. You're probably just uploading a spot and running, which goes back to the same conversation we just had about impressions. If you're just buying ears and don't care who delivers it, how it's delivered, or what the exact audience is, this is probably a good test to check out. But if you have a product that is either regional or could use some customability or needs to be explained by someone trustworthy, then it may be worth holding out.
Okay, Miranda, when you're looking at the way that we buy and knowing that sometimes we do work with platforms and sometimes we don't, what do you think about this type of a tool?
Yeah, so whenever I have the opportunity to compare rates, I see that our rates are better than, what is offered in a programmatic marketplace because we're leveraging long-standing relationships. I think those mediums, while all audio, are very different. The ways that you optimize them, the ways that you can buy, reporting. And so I think it's interesting to see an effort to try to consolidate that. And I think if, time saving in operational efficiencies is a priority, again, I think it's probably interesting, but from a performance standpoint, I'm not sure I see a lot of value in that.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it seems like Amazon used to be a place that you could shop for the best prices. And then eventually it came down to convenience. How do I follow the fewest steps? How do I get what I want the fastest? And this very much feels like the same thing for people that are buying audio. This feels to me like a big brand who's using audio to check a box and just not be there. This could be a very efficient way to buy it when you can buy it all in the same place without having to go through a separate channel. That being said, I think one of the things that we're starting to see is a splitting off in this ecosystem of people that want to use audio because of its power and because of it can really be the secret weapon for growth for a brand, and those that just want to check the box and get through it as efficiently as possible. I don't think McDonald's is ready to really unlock the power of audio because it's too inconvenient. It takes too much focus and attention and work. And so they're going to like something like this. If you can get it for me faster, easier, I don't have to think as hard, then that's great. If you're living and dying and hiring and retaining employees based on the performance of this channel, you have to look at it very differently. And it's not just because they're willing to combine them together doesn't mean that you're going to actually get the value. And we know that terrestrial has to be measured differently than digitally inserted ads. They're incompatible just as a starting point, let alone talking about the difference between produced ads that get trafficked versus truly building a relationship with talent. Apples and oranges. So if you're trying to push those things together, you probably don't care that much about the end result. What are you thinking, James?
I just wonder whether or not this is a last hurrah from broadcast radio. Broadcast radio seeing podcast revenue going up by 29%. They would be delighted if their revenue was going up by 29%. So maybe it's them who are falling over themselves to basically be in another buying platform, which enables them to get a little bit of that sweet podcast money. And perhaps it's just as simple as that. I don't know.
All right, so tell me if you've ever heard of any of these companies. Indeed, Shopify, NetSuite, Headspace, Quip, Theragun, Postmates. I'm not only the host of the Media Roundtable, but also CEO of a company called Oxford Road, and we are the world's leading independently owned and operated audio ad agency. And what that means is that we help great companies, many that you have probably heard of on some of the other podcasts that you listen to. We help them test and scale campaigns in audio channels, with podcast being one of those leading channels. Some of the work that we do includes media planning and buying, as well as analytics, attribution, and insights. And we also have a very special way that we deal with creative and copy generation. We have our own proprietary process called Audiolytics that allows us to score ads for their persuasiveness. If you're looking to be involved in audio and you want a partner that can help work with you to make sure that you achieve unprecedented ROI and massive scale, you should get in touch with us at Oxford Road. And by the way, the only reason that we're able to do the work of the Media Roundtable is because we have a great team at Oxford Road that supports us and makes it possible. So, what we're doing is not just a podcast, but we're really trying to help brands live out their values and balance that with their business objectives, which is an increasingly hard thing to do in this world of misinformation and malice that's infecting so much of our media. But at Oxford Road, we don't want to just broker this stuff. We want to impact the industry for good. We want to raise the bar on what gets created. And Oxford Road is helping make that possible through the Media Roundtable. So if you're somebody that's interested in working with an ad agency or a partner on this type of work for your advertising campaigns, go to oxfordroad.com. It's easy to spell. And get in touch with us, or at least just sign up for our free newsletter, The Influencer. That's oxfordroad.com.
This is Chris Howard, host of Plugged In with Chris Howard. The Kansas City Chiefs are heading to their fourth final in 5 years against a stacked San Francisco 49ers team. Not surprisingly, the Chiefs are currently a 1.5-point underdog. BetOnline is your number one source for up-to-the-minute odds, stats, trends, and lines. You can access the world's best wagering information from your desktop or your mobile device. Head to BetOnline today to stay updated on all the action. BetOnline, the game starts here.
This episode is brought to you by AARP. 10 years from today, Lisa Schneider will trade in her office job to become the leader of a pack of dogs. As the owner of her own dog rescue, that is. A second act made possible by the reskilling courses Lisa's taking now with AARP to help make sure her income lives as long as she does. And she can finally run with the big dogs. And the small dogs, who just think they're big dogs. That's why the younger you are, the more you need AARP. Learn more at aarp.org/skills.
I gave a presentation at the IAB Direct Brand Summit about 5 years ago and used an image to say what I thought was happening in the marketplace. And it was a picture of Anna Nicole Smith and her 90-some-year-old husband together, romantically entwined. And I think you can guess which one is podcast and which one is radio, right? So I think that, there's no question that radio folks have been, leveraging podcasts, hype and excitement to, be a little younger, be a little more interesting to demographics that make the world go round. But at the same time, I also think the death of radio has been greatly exaggerated. And we all keep waiting for this thing to when does it turn off, right? But it's interesting that you say this now, because the story that we're moving to next is not a PBJ story, but it's very much on the topic that you just surfaced. It's the fact that we see the AM radio is striking back against their doom that we reported a few weeks ago. They were getting pulled out of cars, and when they pull them out of cars, all you got is Nana's old AM radio that's sitting on the shelf.
And my dad.
And your dad. And Mr. Romano. But yeah, it's the thing going away or not? What's happening here? The government is now potentially going to intervene to save AM radios and cars. And so the existential threat of that going away now may be changing. So does this ever die, or does it continue to live on and on and on and on? Or what's happening here?
My day job, and I've worked in broadcast radio for 30 years or so. And I think, firstly, it's a tale of two individual markets. So AM radio is already switched off in Europe. There's absolutely no point in having AM radio in your car in Europe, because if you're tuning in through the dial, you'll find very, very little stuff anyway. It's turned off. I mean, FM's even turned off entirely in some areas. As well, so it's most certainly a Northern America thing, most certainly a Canada and the US thing, and actually Australia, which also has some very strong AM stations. I don't think that the consumption of AM is necessarily going to be tied to whether or not it's still available in cars. Of course, you don't get AM in a Tesla car anyway. I think really the thing that is going to save AM radio is if actually the AM broadcasters care about it and they actually start broadcasting stuff that people really want to have a listen to. At the moment, it seems it's all right-wing, shouty stuff in the US, or it's completely automated, output. And the argument has always been, well, we need AM for the emergencies and for blah, blah, blah. Well, if you weren't just rebroadcasting a satellite signal from New York, then perhaps that might be an argument, but I'm not sure it is. So I kind of look at all of this and think, it's not really a thing.
I would 100% agree with you. You actually stole some of my lines that I wanted to bring up here. This is, I actually sent
James. Stop stealing from James.
It must be the name thing.
James is making great points.
Now, listen, if there are safety reasons, fine, that is something. However, I will say, being from New Jersey, New York, we lived through 9/11, we lived through Hurricane Sandy.
Yeah.
Guess what? AMs were off the air, and so they had to go to FM.
Exactly.
And I didn't get to drive my Ford F-150, which I don't own, into the garage or into the basement with me during the hurricane. So you need other means to get the emergency broadcast, which kind of gets me going on this subject, because I honestly feel like it's not a safety issue. If it was a safety issue, they would government issue AM radio handhelds or ones that you can have in your home to everyone, just in case there's an emergency. But I think this all comes down to the content that's on there. This is, like you said, majority of AM radio stations are not live and local. They're not. No,
it's all mostly old. It's mostly old folk who are listening to those AM services anyway. The majority is 55 plus. It's particularly important for the US market because more than 50% of radio listening happens in a car, which is very unlike much of Europe, very unlike most other areas in the world. So you can well understand why radio stations have been a little bit scared, but it's certainly a thing.
Well, so when I got into the AM radio business, because that's what we focused on for a long, long time, the argument was that after World War II, they issued 6 clear channel radio signals to key broadcasters and said, between these 6 sticks, we will be able to send a message to anyone in America for their safety and security. And that's why you have what's called a clear channel signal that can be, 50,000 watts omnidirectional and cover a lot more ground than most of them. Now, if that were true and if that were applicable, you might argue, well, great, then let's keep those 6 afloat and that'll be AM radio for you. But it sounds like what you guys are saying is, it doesn't matter because what we've found is we don't even have the infrastructure to support that, even if it were true.
Well, and you also need the receivers as well out there. You need people to have an AM radio in their house, and quite a lot of people don't. I think 49% of Americans don't own a radio at all right now. So I think that's the other side of it, is that actually it's pointless having an emergency system of broadcast AM radio if nobody owns an AM radio. And actually, the US has a fantastic emergency broadcast system to get messages out to people. It's called mobile phones. And you can send an emergency alert to everybody's mobile phone really, really fast, even if the mobile phone network is full of other stuff. So I think that's probably where it comes. There again, obviously a lot of my large clients are AM broadcasters. So perhaps I should be slightly more positive.
Well, it's interesting, though. And James, do you have any idea how many people don't own a mobile phone in America?
Oh, I think it's less than 8%, isn't it? It's a tiny amount of the people that don't own mobile phones that don't have the emergency alerts on them. Yeah, I think it's a very, very small number.
Okay, so there's maybe about 25 million people that we could ship an AM radio to, or ship them a mobile phone that they can turn on in case of emergency.
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, well, as somebody who's nostalgic for the channel and deeply rooted for it, there's a part of me that wants to see AM stay in the game, but I understand there are some pretty compelling arguments that maybe it's time for the world to move on. Next topic, Miranda, I want you to tell us about this one. It's something to do with experts in armchairs. What do we got?
Yeah, so Spotify announced that they are considering removing exclusivity from Armchair Expert. I think this is a no-brainer, and it's not shocking. They've invested over $1 billion in podcasting since 2019, and in Q1 reported it was over $200 million loss. And so exclusivity limits audience growth, and when you're selling based off of impressions, it limits revenue. Back in October, there were some Gimlet staff members that actually cited exclusivity as one of the main reasons for the shows not doing well after the layoffs. And Spotify actually started expanding distribution and testing this with a Gimlet show, Scienceverse, back in April. And they said that they were going to be doing this on a case-by-case basis. When it comes to exclusivity, I think exclusivity on the larger shows like Joe Rogan and Call Her Daddy, the ones that already have a really large following, I think it benefited them to bring them behind Spotify because it helped them kind of build out their ecosystem. But now that they're the second most used platform, I think it's time to find ways to capitalize on the broader podcast ecosystem.
All right. So what are the takeaways for brands on this? Why is this important? And I'll opening this up to anybody here.
I think from my perspective, the reason why it's a good thing for advertisers is because it just creates more supply, which will enable Spotify to get more aggressive when it comes to pricing. The other thing I just want to call out is that Westwood One and Signal Hill, they just published a study claiming that YouTube is the dominant discovery platform for podcasts. It showed that the YouTube podcast audience is not exclusively tied to the platform. And 77% of the 54% of those surveyed who consume podcasts on YouTube say that if a podcast were to become exclusive outside of YouTube, they would just use the new platform. So I also think this could be an interesting tactic for Spotify to capture new audiences and then eventually bring them back into, again, the Spotify ecosystem.
Yeah, so I've seen the industry grappling with this since we got into it, where NPR and New York Public Radio, they were some of the earliest creators or publishers to make podcasts, to take it seriously. And what I noticed that they did right out of the gate was they weren't precious about where people listened. They would put it on anywhere that podcasts were listed. And then when iHeart came in and started doing M&A, I think they were early in that, they started forcing people to listen to their content only through the iHeart app, I think in hopes that they could be the dominant player in that. But what a lot of people learn very quickly is as soon as you gate something, whether even if there's no cost of consuming it, you're going to drastically reduce the number, the addressable audience. And so they have to do a very difficult calculation. In Spotify's case, I think they've come in so strong that you could argue that they can afford to do it. And so when they took Rogan in and they started walling him off, they're like, it doesn't matter. We still have one of the top most listened to podcasts. It really doesn't matter. We don't need the extra distribution. But then now they're getting squeezed. Everybody's getting squeezed. And you have to ask yourself the question, one, is it good for a publisher? Is the value of having them be forced into your channel with those that are willing to do it worth the cost, the opportunity cost of all the consumers you're going to miss by being omni-channel? And then you have to ask yourself, what's the impact on a consumer? Like as a listener, I think we all agree we'd prefer that they all be listed wherever we're at. We don't necessarily want to go out of our way, right? And I think that shows up in the ratings. And so it's a tricky situation. My thinking is, as this evolves further and more creators and platforms have to navigate this, that if you're a publisher and you have a platform and you want to increase engagement on your platform and not just give it all away to your competitors, but you still want to get that share, you should do cut downs. You should give it's a funnel, right? And you have valuable content that's available to everybody that draws them in. But as you want to go deeper and deeper, get the full episode, hear the extended interview, then you start putting that behind a paywall and creating engagement. What are you thinking, James?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of different business models here. Amazon, for example, releases shows a week early for some of their things. The New York Times is doing a similar thing with the This American Life, which they're releasing a day earlier on the NYT Audio app. So there's a bunch of different plans there. But this, I don't think, is necessarily that new for Spotify. They've always been doing windowing of some shape with Harry and Meghan's show as one
Did
example.
They have a show?
Yeah, they did. Apparently so. So did Obama. Of course, had a show. So there's a bunch of that sort of windowing going on. I mean, I have seen stories about Brené Brown, for example, who apparently sold far less books when she went as an exclusive onto Spotify because, of course, she was influencing less people. And I suppose it's your choice as a podcaster. Do you want to be there purely to make money, or do you want to be there to influence people, for people to hear your ideas, for you to push your personal brand forward? And you're not going to succeed in any of that if you are cutting your audience off by only going on one individual platform. So I think it's, you've got that side of it as well.
Yeah, I feel like it's inherent in audio. The history of audio is the town crier. It's that everyone can hear it. It is cast broadly. It is available to all, and it's easy. That's, AM, FM, we were talking about that. It's so easy. I can turn that on. It's 2 buttons. It's 1 button. So the more that we can emulate that, the better. And I think you kind of move against the medium itself when you try to narrow it down and make it selective. Audio, we don't even have to be looking at something to hear it. We listen to it when we're doing other things. So the more complex we make it to get to something, or, I like this person, they're on that platform, but that person's on that platform, I'm out. Like, forget that. How do I turn on the radio, listen to the thing I want? Oh, here, let me listen to that. It's like, to me, it's inherent in audio. It needs to be easy.
Yep.
I think there's something to having the hero product too. Like SiriusXM started this probably arguably with Stern when he left radio and went over to SiriusXM exclusively. The only way to hear him was to go there, and he was the type of personality that had legions of fans who would pay and still do pay to listen to him. I think everyone could have one of those, but the minute you start fragmenting it all and thinking that every single person who listens to a podcast is just going to come into your walled garden, it gets too small. Rogan's probably an exception, Stern's an exception, and I don't know if there's really many others.
Well, and I agree with everything you guys are saying, and just would add that I think ultimately, if media continues to evolve, the ideal situation is it's a marketing funnel that results in a subscription where the most loyal members of the tribe can get things that only they are going to care about, but they're going to want the merch. They're going to want the secondary products, and creators are going to start launching more and more signature lines of product. And it's more than just a channel to be entertained. It's something that actually results in products and services that you're engaging with on an ongoing basis, and that you're you're a customer of that show as well as just a passive listener. But where you draw that line between paid and available, but only available some places, to widely available, I think we're now on a maybe decade process of brands and publishers and creators figuring that out. And as far as the brands are concerned, I'm not sure they benefit at all from any publisher narrowing how broadly a show can be heard. It seems like that's all in the favor of the publisher or platform, and not at all for the consumer or the sponsor. So, all right, one more topic, and Stu, I'm going to turn it over to you to let us know what's happening with jingles. Do they still make jingles?
They still make jingles. Do not neglect the jingles. It is so powerful. We were talking about audio and hearing. It's our first sense. You hear something before you can see it, you process it auditorially first, and it lasts in our minds 5 times longer than the visual. It is so powerful, and it's being used with VMLY and R Commerce and Health in Puerto Rico to work with Alzheimer's patients. There's a fantastic story. We'll have it linked. There's a video. It is an Ad Age story. It is powerful. It is moving, and it just shows you, it illustrates how deeply and intimately audio can connect with us, and that when it comes to a jingle, some kind of a sonic brand, that is something that is recognizable even when other things are no longer recognizable. And so the power that is inherent there in sonic branding is really put on display in that story and in that video.
And Stu, what is the difference between sonic branding and a jingle?
I'd say jingle is a subset of sonic branding. So sonic branding to me is any distinct and intentional recognizable sound. So think of the Intel Inside, bum, 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 to a jingle as a song. Those are all like subspecies of whatever your sonic brand is, which you have a sonic brand. Every business has a sonic brand. That is how you show up in sound. So as intentional as you can be about it and as distinct as you can be about it is important. It's just very notable that audio in and of itself is so memorable. Like I was just listening to the gentleman Walter Werzowa from Musikvergnügen, which is who designed the Intel Inside sound. He was making this point about how all you have to hear is half a second of like the beginning of the song Beat It, or of the beginning of the song Tainted Love. And he was showcasing this on a 20,000 Hertz episode, and your mind fills in the rest of it. And that's what's on display here, is that if you can intentionally show up sonically, ringing the bell like in a Pavlovian sense, intentionally and consistently and distinctly show up sonically, that is recall, and that is recognition, that is fluency that people are going to have with your brand. Absolutely.
So do we need a sonic logo for the Media Roundtable? And why is our music so bad? Why does everyone hate it and complain?
It doesn't matter if it's, well, that's the cool thing, is because there's the mere exposure effect. Over time, people will love that song. They will love how much they hate it.
It's
and they
true.
Will hate how much
I was
they
gonna
love it.
say say something, but I've gotten used to it.
Yeah,
So.
it's the mere exposure effect at work, Miranda.
I mean,
that is your survival mechanism.
Living case study right here.
So every time someone complains to me, why is your music so bad on the podcast?
They're
I just need to say, obviously you're not listening enough.
Exactly. You keep coming, keep coming
back
until you love
coming
it.
back. Now,
True.
James Cridland, I know you got something to say here. You're just chomping at the bit. What do you think about all this sonic branding business?
And by the way, I should say, what's the difference in between a jingle and sonic branding? About $10 million.
Yeah,
that's what the difference is.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a good thing talking about the Alzheimer's patients and playing them old jingles for them to remember stuff. I did a story about 2 or 3 years ago it was a subscription radio station that was specifically built for nursing homes, and it was playing music from the 1950s and the 1940s, and apparently just the difference in the patients when they hear music that they remember, when they hear it presented in a non-confusing way, in a nice and simple and straightforward way, they just light up. It's an amazing thing. So I think you can do some really interesting things. Just it shows the power of radio and the power of audio in general, that it's capable of doing so many different things in terms of awakening our the way that we used to end up living 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Well, I was watching a documentary on the early days of Hollywood when it was just getting started, and they were doing so much experimentation with silent films, which are, let's be honest, they're mostly unwatchable to us now.
You don't have the organist there to make it watchable.
Honestly, that was half of it. The
Yes.
orchestras were half of it.
Of course.
100%. Yeah. So, but one of the things that one of Cecil B. DeMille's ancestors is talking about how, like, they knew that they were not great artists. They knew that what they were doing wasn't that good, but they also knew that they were the forerunners to the most compelling platform for media that the world had ever seen, that would build, community across the globe. And I wonder a lot of times if that's where we're at in audio, and if it's truly that we haven't scratched the surface on some of the power that can be unlocked between things like the integration of intimacy and relationship and sonic branding and things that are going to connect with people on levels much more deeply than all the stuff we're just throwing at the wall right now. So
no question. We're at the beginning. I mean,
we even made a dent in sonic branding.
I mean, synesthesia,
industry.
With ASMR being something that now actually people talk about, like that is linked to a powerful aspect of audio and the brain science that we're able to measure this stuff and see the impact. I think you're spot on. This is just the end of the beginning of all that audio is going to be able to do. No question.
Well, this also comes down to like on TikTok. I see all the time. I get targeted like 80s memories and all stuff. And you hear these TV commercials, and the biggest thing is sitcom theme songs. Those don't exist anymore, and so which is a really fun. I'm sure someone's done a study on it, but now it's just like as much as you can get in there to get to the advertising, to get to the content, and all that. And there was 2-3 minute radio worthy songs as the intro to these sitcoms back then. But hearing them now just brings back like this little slice of your brain and brings like so many memories. It's incredible. So
there's a lot here, guys. So we should keep talking about this audio stuff and keep trying to figure out how it's actually supposed to work, because it sounds like we're just in the early days.
Audio, who knew?
Yeah, exactly.
Look, it's only been 100 years. All right?
There needs to be a conference
started.
That should be the tagline for one of our conferences. Who knew? Okay, guys, we were going to throw you a curveball today. We ran out of time because the conversation was just so good. But stick around, keep coming back, because we're going to keep experimenting with our platform and doing things that you would have never imagined with it. If you have not listened to Stu's ad infinitum that is being dropped in this feed for free, you don't have to go to another platform to get it. You don't even have to register. And if you care about sound and you care about persuasion with sound and you want to hear a lot of sound at work from people who work in the work of sound, it's a good thing to listen to. Audio ad infinitum. Finally, I just want to thank everybody who joined us today. Thank you, James Cridland. Thank you, James Ingrassia. Thank you, Stu Redwine. Thank you, Miranda Romano, for finally joining us on the podcast. James has been here 7 times. We're glad we got you 1. And Haley, Kyle, Jennifer, Bianca, the team at Podcast One, thank you guys for everything that you do. Don't forget to go to oxfordroad.com, subscribe to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer, and as always, influence responsibly.